The things that come out of a person are what defile them, for it is from within, from the human heart, that evil intentions come. A few weeks ago, in early August, I went home to Newfoundland to do a funeral service for my brother who had died early in the COVID pandemic from complications of diabetes. We had a wonderful service, and the family members who were home were truly appreciative that we were finally able to put our brother to rest with Mom and Dad and one of our other brothers. While I was there, I happened to be able to spend a day and a night with my oldest nephew, Colin, his wife, Lori, and their two children, ages 11 and 12. We gathered for supper, and the children came rushing in, and were immediately sent off to the washroom, to the bathroom to wash their hands. They protested vehemently, "But our hands are not dirty, look." Their mom said, "Off to the bathroom." "But why?" "Because there are germs on your hands from playing outside." "But there aren't, look. Can't you see?" "Just go and wash your hands." And the children reluctantly went off, grumbling all the way, and washed their hands. Now, there's a situation similar to that in the gospel today. Jesus and the Pharisees are having a big fight about hand washing, about the Jewish tradition of having to wash their hands before dinner. And Jesus puts the tradition down, and in fact, he even calls the Pharisees hypocrites who have God on their lips but not in their hearts. This story gives us something to think about when it comes to rules, about traditions, and about our own faith. And it is these things that I want to explore with you today. Now, if you were a follower of the Jewish tradition of today, then you'd know that every person was required to wash before eating. And it was for practical reasons, for health reasons, of course. But Jesus is now telling the people that they have to live from the inner meaning of traditions and laws. Well, let's look at that and talk about it. As parents, when we speak about the interior of traditions and rules and laws, we know that children do not yet have a fully developed interior value system. Does this sound familiar? It's bedtime now, and I know it's hard to go to bed. But let's get started. Let's brush our teeth and put our pajamas on. But it's still light outside. I don't want to go to bed yet. I know it's hard to stop playing and go to bed, and I understand that. But bedtime is here. Let's get started. But why? Because we have to get our rest so we can be bright and cheerful tomorrow. But why? Because I said so. Now get moving. Rules, the right ones, must be imposed on children, but it must be done in a very loving and gentle way. And as we grow up, the child's why gets answered by experience and maturity. Adults go to bed because they need a certain amount of sleep and rest each night. And they know it. Well, at least most of us do. But why have rules and traditions and laws in the first place? This is what I have heard. Rules are meant to describe the minimum that we have to do in order to belong to a country or state or city or business or group or family or even, yes, a church. Rules. Not too many, not too few, but some are necessary. And Jesus knew that any law of the kingdom of God must emerge from love or else be empty. St. Paul, it seems, would agree. He tells the Corinthian community, "If I speak in the tongues of mortals and angels, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith so to move mountains, but don't have love, I'm nothing. And if I give away all my possessions, and if I hand over my body so that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing." Paul here is saying the same thing as Jesus. that all our external diligence and excellence amounts to nothing if our interior disposition is not motivated by love for God and for our neighbor. And Jesus was upset that the Pharisees and scribes had manipulated the laws to feed their own egos. This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. The Pharisees, far from applying the law with love as a more deeply understanding of God's love for us, were wielding the law as a weapon to cut people off from their community. But let's not misunderstand the passage, though. Jesus is not telling them to ignore the laws and just have inner devotion. He's saying you must have both. So now let's apply this to a group. Take a faith-sharing group, for instance, that meets weekly. We have them. It has an implicit expectation, perhaps even requirements, that its members be present at each weekly meeting. But what if a person only shows up once or twice a year? But when they do, is the heart and soul of the discussion and of the meeting. But what if another person attends every single meeting, but just sits there like a lump on a log and contributes nothing, and in fact has no interest in the topics? Neither person follows what the group guidelines ask of its members. Neither person is able to reap the full benefits of what the group has to offer. Both persons are part of the community, but neither one is able to obtain the full life that comes from being a part of that community. See? And in the same way, Jesus is saying that it's not just inner devotion that is important, but external and internal adherence must both be exercised. Rules are put in place to help guide people to do the right thing. We have to look at our own lives and see where our inner values lie. Maybe that would help us to have the right heart, both inside and outside. And Jesus' own life is an example of this. We know that he lived his life in perfect obedience to his Father, even when it was difficult. But we also know the interior of Jesus is the spirit of love. Conversely, Jesus knows that the Pharisees and scribes constantly use the exterior rules when it is convenient for them. These people honors me with their lips, but in their hearts they are far from me. So what then is tradition? And what does this story say about tradition? Well, a tradition is a custom or a belief or something precious that is passed on from generation to generation to generation. But the traditions that the Pharisees are clinging to do not in fact convey the God of Moses, do they? What kind of God would make his total acceptance or rejection of a person dependent on whether or not they wash their hands before dinner? Where is the righteous, merciful, loving God of Moses in this view of the Pharisees? Well, we might think if blind adherence to tradition gets the Pharisees' denunciation of the Lord, then so much for tradition. And yet, where would we be without tradition? Our whole religious understanding and practice, even our creeds, are based on tradition. We hear in the first reading Moses telling the people to communicate God's commands without giving or taking anything from them. He tells them, keep the commandments of the Lord your God, with which I am charging you. God asks us to pass along what we have received from him. So we may say that tradition comes from God. So how then do we resolve the apparent contradiction of God commanding us to follow tradition with Jesus' words calling them hypocrites? Well, the solution to this question probably lies in the story. When the Pharisees asked Jesus why his disciples don't keep the tradition of hand washing, their question isn't a request for information. It is a challenge to his whole ministry. They are using the tradition not in a way motivated by God's love, but rather they're using it as a weapon to exclude people. And it is the interior action of the heart of the Pharisees that Jesus is denouncing. When the Pharisees privilege hand washing above the true goodness of Christ, they do not transmit what Moses told them. They wreck it in the name of tradition. And that is why Jesus tells the Pharisees they are teaching human precepts as doctrines. You abandon the commandment of God and hold to human tradition. These so-called defenders of religious tradition have lost their grip on the very thing they were supposed to pass on, God's goodness and love. And that is exactly why Jesus calls them hypocrites. So perhaps it might be worthwhile for you and me to look at the various obligations in our lives and weigh how much they correspond to our inner values and convictions. We also must look at ourselves to determine if our actions are motivated by God's love or by ego, by arrogance or by defensiveness, by pride or by fear. If we don't do this, we risk Jesus rightly saying of us, "This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me." Perhaps this is a cautionary tale for all of us. May God bless you, each and every one of you.